Bitcoin, how much lower does it have to go? Remember, Bitcoin, for the most part, at least so far, and that may change at some point, but it remains essentially a very highly correlated commodity, if that's what we want to call it, versus essentially risk assets. So let's take a look and see what's going on. But again, the story hasn't changed. It remains highly correlated. At some point, maybe that changes. So keep that in mind. So here we are, and we're going to start off first with what really remains my favorite chart of Bitcoin, because it explains, I think, the price action best, and that is essentially the long-term logarithmic chart of Bitcoin. And what you see with it, and this is very nice because it kind of explains the adoption cycle as well. But you do see this pattern even in the early days of its existence, where Bitcoin did actually behave such a way, even again when it was literally trading at like $200 or less, where it was rallying, adoption would come in, then they would get sort of frothy, and it would basically retrace back to where it kind of broke out from, and again that's what it looks like, and then it would start the bigger move to the upside. And so it's not always exactly perfect, but it's been a lot more I don't want to use the word perfect. That's not the right word to use in markets anyway, but it's been a lot clearer to show this basically since 2017, so for the past 8 years or so. And so I'm going to try to focus on that. So we had a really meaningful move to the upside that took place. That's when the stock or the commodity went almost to 20,000. You might remember that was the first big move. And then it basically started bouncing back and forth, but it really didn't get out of its own way until it had that next move in 2020, which was during COVID, of course. And we honestly, it's crazy to say, but really Bitcoin hasn't gone a whole lot higher since that point, since the actual peak of COVID in 2021, even though we did have a breakout that got us back to 110,000. But what's happening now, and again, this is just what Bitcoin does, it's the adoption cycle. It gets into, it's also to some extent some of the kind of people that are involved in Bitcoin, particularly on the individual investor front. But what's happening is we're once again, after a breakout, kind of checking back to what used to be support. And what you will notice, though, and this is very obvious, is that the volatility has shrunk. And that's, I think, because of the investor base. The institutional side has now become a bigger thing. So the question, of course, is how much lower does Bitcoin have to go? Well, historically speaking, the drawdowns or the corrective periods of Bitcoin have been as little as 33% and as much as 78%. I'm not going to want to go on the record of saying that we can't correct 78% because Bitcoin, I think, again, remains volatile. But even if we just go back to the breakout point around 70, the low 70s, let's say, that would still leave Bitcoin, and I'll make this a daily chart, get back to, and this is honestly very basic technical stuff, right? But it tends to work quite well in Bitcoin for the big picture moves. But that would get Bitcoin down about 34%, which is kind of the minimum of the drawdown. Listen, I have no doubt this thing can drop 50% and get us back towards 50,000. That wouldn't be fun. I own some Bitcoin. It wouldn't be fun for me either, but it is how this thing has acted in the past, and particularly if broader risk assets are more volatile, we cannot rule that out. So I'm going to say, I think a move back into 70,000, that would seem very normal from a historic perspective. Can it overshoot and drop to 50, 60,000? It can. So that's kind of where we think we are after that, as long as the story hasn't totally changed. I would imagine Bitcoin will go higher again, maybe goes towards 150,000 finally at that point then. But right now, we're in a risk-off phase, so we need to make sure we don't panic, at least those that believe in the long-term story of Bitcoin, at least from a diversification perspective, which I personally happen to in small size because it's a volatile asset.